The wind moved softly through the old stone courtyard, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and rain-soaked earth. Beyond the walls of the ancient temple, where time itself seemed to sleep, lay a hidden garden, a place few had ever seen, and even fewer had understood. It was said that the garden was alive with voices, not the kind that came from lips, but the kind that came from souls. Whispers of those who once loved, who once longed, who once waited. And at the heart of that sacred place lived Ilara, the healer of the kingdom. She was not like the others in the temple. While the priests prayed to the gods for strength, Ilara prayed for gentleness. Her hands carried warmth, her voice carried calm, and her eyes, deep and quiet, held the kind of sorrow only the stars could recognize. Every night, after tending to the wounded and weary, she would walk barefoot into the garden, letting the moonlight touch her face. The air there shimmered faintly, as though the garden breathed with her. Each flower seemed to lean toward her as she passed, and sometimes, when the night was very still, she could hear the soft murmurs of spirits drifting through the air. Some said she was blessed by the gods. Others whispered she was cursed, a woman whose heart had once belonged to a man lost to time itself. Ilara never spoke of it, but sometimes when the wind stirred the petals and the moon glowed silver over the marble pond, she would pause, and a tear would trace down her cheek without warning. It was on one such night, when the moon was a pale flame in the sky, that the silence of the garden was broken. A wounded soldier had been brought to the temple, unconscious, near death, his armor cracked and his hands still clutching the sword that had failed to protect him. The monks carried him gently, laying him before Ilara. As she knelt beside him, her fingers brushed his skin, and in that single touch, her breath caught. The garden stirred, the wind rose, the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. Ilara's eyes widened. She had never seen this man before. Yet her soul trembled as though it had been waiting for him all her life. The night deepened, and the candles in the healing hall burned low. Ilara moved silently, her white robe brushing against the stone floor as she gathered her herbs and oils. The warrior lay still upon the marble table, his breathing shallow, his face pale beneath the flickering light. When she pulled back the torn cloth from his chest, she saw the wound, deep, cruel, yet curiously clean, as if guided by destiny rather than rage. She whispered a prayer, her voice soft as wind over water. May the pain of the body be eased, and may the spirit find its way home. Her fingers dipped into the bowl of healing oil, warm and glimmering with the faint gold of moonlight. As she pressed her palm gently to his wound, a strange warmth surged through her. Not her own, but something older, something familiar. The garden outside seemed to come alive. The flowers leaned toward the temple window. The pond rippled though there was no breeze. And from somewhere unseen came a whisper. Soft, distant, almost like a sigh. You found him again. Ilara froze. Her eyes lifted toward the shadows of the room, but no one was there. Her heart raced, yet her hand did not move away from his chest. She could feel his pulse, faint but steady, and beneath it, something else. A pull, a connection. His name, she learned later, was Kale, a warrior from the northern lands, sent by the king to guard the temple. But as she looked at him, unconscious yet strangely peaceful, she felt certain she had known him long before that name ever existed. Night after night, she sat beside him. She changed his bandages, cooled his fever, and spoke softly to him though he could not answer. Sometimes when her eyelids grew heavy, she would drift into sleep by his side. And in those dreams, she saw him standing beneath a tree of light, calling her name as though he had been calling it for centuries. When she awoke, her heart would ache, though she could never explain why. Then one evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains and the first silver of moon touched the sky, Kyle stirred, his eyes opened, clear and storm gray like clouds about to weep. He looked at her for a long moment, silent, searching. You, he whispered hoarsely. I've seen you before. Ilara's breath caught, her pulse quickened. In your dreams? She asked softly. He nodded. In a garden filled with whispers. The garden shimmered with soft moonlight as the night settled around them. Ilara sat beside Kyle beneath the willow tree. its silver leaves swaying gently as if they too were listening. The air carried the scent of night-blooming flowers, sweet, haunting, and strangely familiar to them both. Kyle's wounds had begun to heal, yet his spirit remained restless. Often she would find him standing at the marble pond, gazing at his reflection as if searching for something beyond the surface. "You said you've seen me before," Alara whispered one evening, her voice quiet as the garden itself. "Where was it?" He turned to her slowly, his eyes soft with remembrance. "In dreams that felt older than memory," he said. "A garden like this one. You were there, dressed in white, your hair touched by starlight. I remember your hands, and your voice calling my name, though it was not the name I bear now." Alara's chest tightened. "And what did you feel in that dream?" He hesitated. Then almost reverently he said, "Peace and sorrow, as if I'd waited lifetimes to find you again." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning neither could explain. Alara lowered her gaze to the pond. "There are whispers in this place," and she murmured, "the souls of those who loved and lost. Sometimes they speak to me. Sometimes they call my name. Perhaps they remember what I cannot." Kyle reached out, his hand hovering near hers, hesitant, respectful, but filled with a longing that stirred the air between them. "When you healed me," he said quietly, "I saw flashes, not of this life, but of another. I saw us standing together beneath a golden tree, hands joined. The air smelled of jasmine, and I told you I would return to you, even if the gods tore the world apart." Ilara's eyes glistened. Her heart trembled like the petals at her feet. "I felt your presence before," she confessed, "sometimes in my dreams, sometimes in the quiet moments when I thought I was alone. Perhaps this is not our first meeting, Cal, but our return." The garden seemed to exhale, the wind circling them in a tender embrace. The pond's surface rippled, and faint whispers rose, fragments of voices too ancient to name. Cal took her hand at last, their fingers intertwining. "Then tell me," he said softly, "if our souls have found each other across time, what do we do now?" Alara smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. "We listen," she said. "The garden will tell us what we've forgotten." And as they sat together beneath the willow's silver light, the whispers grew stronger, gentle, melodic, carrying a secret only their hearts could understand. The nights that followed were filled with gentle wonder. Kyle's strength returned, yet he found no desire to leave the temple. Each evening he would walk with Alara through the garden's winding paths, where the moonlight fell in silver streams and the air hummed with unseen life. They spoke little at first. The silence between them was its own language, a rhythm of hearts that already understood one another. Then one night, the garden itself began to stir. As they passed beneath the ancient willow, a sudden gust of wind swept through the branches, scattering petals across the pond. The water glowed faintly, not from moonlight, but from something deeper, older. "Ilara," Kyle whispered, "do you feel that?" She nodded, her pulse quickening. "The garden remembers." The whispers rose again, soft, overlapping voices speaking a language lost to time. The air shimmered, and for a moment, the world around them changed. The stone walls faded into light. The pond became a field of stars. And there, standing before them, were two figures, faint, radiant, reflections of themselves. Kyle's breath caught. "It's us." The vision unfolded like a dream remembered too late. The other Ilara, dressed in flowing gold, her hair crowned with blossoms, stood beside a man in silver armor, his sword laid at her feet. "I cannot stay," his voice echoed faintly through the air. "The gods call me to battle beyond the veil. But I will return to you, my heart, as surely as the moon returns to the night." Her reflection lifted his hand, pressed it to her heart. "Then I will wait, even if it takes 1,000 years. The garden will keep our promise. The whispers will carry our names until you find me again." The vision dissolved in a swirl of light, leaving only the sound of the wind through the leaves, and the two of them standing hand in hand, trembling beneath its power. Kyle turned to her, his eyes filled with awe and sorrow. "It was real. We made a vow, Alara. A vow that crossed lifetimes, tears glistened on her lashes. And now the garden has kept its word. They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the gentle hum of the night. Around them, the flowers swayed as if in joy, and the pond rippled softly, reflecting the stars above. But as peace began to settle over them, a chill crept through the air, a reminder that every promise, no matter how sacred, carries a shadow. The garden's whispers began to change, no longer calm, but warning. Something stirred beyond the temple walls. Kyle turned sharply toward the darkness beyond the gate. "They're coming," he murmured. "The king's men, or worse." Alara's heart clenched. "Why?" "Because they fear what they do not understand," he said. "And the king fears this garden. Its magic, its truth, and now, us." The temple bells began to toll in the distance. Low, trembling notes that rolled through the valley like a warning carried by the wind. Ellery and Kale stood at the garden gate as torches flickered beyond the trees. The night, once peaceful, now pulsed with unease. "The king's men are searching for me," Kyle said quietly. "He fears I've turned against him, that I've fallen under a spell." His eyes met hers, steady, sorrowful, resolute. He was right about one thing. "I have fallen, but not under a spell. I've fallen into something I cannot undo." Ilara's throat tightened. "Love is no betrayal, Kyle." He smiled faintly. "To a king who rules through fear, love is rebellion." The wind stirred again, carrying the whispers of the garden, voices rising like a chorus of sighs. The moon cast silver upon their faces, illuminating the truth neither could ignore. "You must go," Ilara whispered, though her voice trembled. "If they find you here, they will destroy everything. The garden, the temple, you." Kyle shook his head. "I will not leave you. I crossed lifetimes to find you again. What is one more battle?" She stepped closer, placing her hand upon his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm. "And what if this battle takes you from me again? What if the gods demand the same sacrifice?" He covered her hand with his, their fingers entwined. "Then I will return again, as I promised, through time, through death, through every whisper of this garden." Her eyes shone with tears. "You speak as though the soul is stronger than the body." Kyle smiled softly. "Perhaps it is. Perhaps the body fades, but love is what remembers." The torches drew closer, their light flickering against the temple walls. Ilara looked toward the garden, where the pond shimmered like liquid starlight. "Then let the garden protect us. It has kept our vow before. It will again." They stepped into the heart of the garden, where moonlight pooled like water. The air shimmered, and the whispers rose into a soft chant, 1,000 voices merging into one gentle sound. Ilara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. "If love has bound us across lifetimes, let it protect us now. Let our souls remember the path back to each other." Kale drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I will find you," he whispered, "even if the gods burn the sky." The garden answered with a pulse of light, bright, silent, eternal. And then the world stilled. When the king's men burst through the gates, they found no one. Only the scent of jasmine and the soft rustle of petals drifting over an empty marble path. When morning came, the temple grounds were quiet again. The king's men searched for hours, but there was no trace of the healer or the warrior. Only the garden remained, untouched, serene, and filled with a strange, tender stillness. The monks said the air smelled sweeter that day. The flowers bloomed brighter, and the pond reflected the sky like a mirror of silver glass. And if you stood very still, they whispered, you could hear the faint echo of two voices in the wind. Not words, but a feeling, a promise. Seasons passed. The temple grew old, the walls cracked, and the garden became a place of legend. Travelers from distant lands came to see it, drawn by stories of a love that defied time itself. They said that on certain nights, when the moon hung low and full, a soft mist would rise from the pond, and in it, two figures could be seen walking hand in hand beneath the willow tree. A woman in white, her hair kissed by starlight. A man in armor, his eyes like storm clouds. They never spoke. They never aged. They simply walked together, their souls bound by a vow whispered long ago beneath a golden tree. And when the night was stillest, the garden would hum with a living warmth, as though the very earth remembered their love. Those who came seeking healing found peace instead. Those who came broken left with hearts strangely light, as if some unseen tenderness had touched them, even for a moment. For love that true does not fade. It moves quietly through time, breathing through the spaces between moments, finding new ways to bloom. And in that sacred garden, love became eternal, not bound to flesh or to memory, but to the whisper of the soul itself. Sometimes on a quiet night, when the moonlight falls just right, the wind still carries their promise through the leaves. Even if the world forgets our names, love will remember, and the garden answers softly, in the language only hearts can hear.